But thank you all for joining us today throughout the whole session, and specifically for this panel as well. As you are well aware, today the category is body, specifically 3D bodies. And now we're going to talk about ownership and privacy, because this is something that touches in a very interesting space in fashion. And I think any of us who were partaking in music downloading and things like that 20 plus years ago understood how much this topic really shook up the music industry. And it's also a big part of the conversation. It needs to be a part of the conversation in fashion. So we have a wonderful group of panelists here to start diving into ownership and privacy. Who should own the 3D avatar and why is it important? So to get us started, I'm going to have all of my panelists just go through and introduce yourself and tell us what you're all about. And I will start with you, Ty.
Sure, thank you. I am the COO of Tafi, and our company creates not just avatar content, but also an avatar SDK to empower other groups and companies and brands to enter the digital space.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ty. I'm going to go to Tracy.
Hi, I'm Tracy Rickert. I'm a senior consultant with Alvanon, and I think everybody probably knows what we do, but we provide the fit standards for brands and avatars in 3D.
Awesome. Thank you, Tracy. One of the most exciting moments in my life as a designer is when I finally got my hands on a half-scale male Alvanon dress form. It was just like, it came in the mail and it was like Christmas in July. I loved it. Thank you so much, Tracy. I'm going to move on to Daina.
Hi, everybody. I'm Daina Burns. I'm the CEO of Bold Metrics. We just gave a talk, but in case you missed it, high level, what we do at Bold Metrics is we have an AI body scanning technology that accurately produces detailed body measurements on consumers by just asking them survey questions, so no pictures required or measuring tapes required for that matter. And with that technology, we can produce 3D avatars, and we work with technical designers to understand if their fit model correction selection is correct, or if their gradation patterns work as it reflects to what consumers are purchasing. So we have a size guiding system, and we track purchase and returns that continuously learn on the data, so we can provide all these insights upstream for technical designers. And can I also say, I just love, Ty, your avatar. Can we just call that out? No one's mentioned it. It's
Thank you.
Cool. It's just the best thing ever. But anyways, nice to meet everybody.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Daina. And we're going to round off with Gina.
Thanks, Christian. Hi, everyone. My name is Gina Bibby. I'm a lawyer, and I am a partner at the Withers Bergman law firm, and I'm the global head of our firm's fashion technology practice. I advise clients in the technology, fashion tech, and fashion industry on issues around intellectual property, licensing, data privacy, and things of that sort. So it's nice to be with you today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gina. I always love having legal experts that understand the fashion space as well, because my legal expertise as a designer begins and ends with My Cousin Vinny and Legally Blonde. And I have a feeling that that's not really going to get me everywhere I need to be and to operate in a safe space in the industry. So thank you so much, Gina, for joining us. All right, so let's crack into this, guys. I want to start with a pretty basic question, and I'm going to direct this to you, Ty, as well. Why this topic? Why is the topic of avatar ownership important to talk about?
So I think it's super interesting, and I was excited when we first got the topics, because there's like 3 layers to ownership, right? You can talk from a developer or a technology perspective, like Bold Metrics or Alvanon, or you can talk from an IP perspective, like say if you're working with a celebrity or an influencer, or people are probably aware of like the digitals and the work they do with like Shudu. They own those imagery because they created these characters. And then you also have, from our business, the perspective of the user. And so when you start talking about ownership, it's also like you start getting into these concepts of user identity. And then how do you actually own that and not have someone, like if you think of the character I'm wearing right now, if I had a voice modulator on, I could impersonate Daina. And there's no way to confirm whether I'm actually Daina or not, because there's no NFT metadata or anything behind me confirming to you that I'm Ty. I am, by the way. I'm not the cat lawyer. I am absolutely Ty. But what becomes super interesting about this to me is we have to look at it from all three layers because of our partnerships, because of the SDK to the general users, and because as developers and as this technology, we have to like own the underlying geometry and how we actually pull this off. Otherwise, like our technology is in the wild and it's not useful to anyone. So it's really interesting. And I think, you know, you see projects, and I know you guys had the Kronos group on an earlier panel. You see projects where they're talking about these open initiatives to try and create that kind of joined effort because of that ownership issue, right? You need to be able to create and innovate from a technology perspective without having to like lock down that ownership. But what really gets interesting to me is when you start talking about that user ownership, because right now you really just kind of rent your avatar from whatever platform you're using it, if that makes sense.
Awesome. And it is, as you said, it's very layered, because just sort of thinking about it, I've been watching Netflix documentaries. So I watched one where they were sort of talking about how privacy in a few ways is embedded into the American Constitution. So it does touch a lot of legal points, and it makes me like, gosh, well, what does this mean for my avatar being put out there? So thank you so much, Ty. For the rest of our panel, do you guys, why is this an important topic to discuss? I'm going to come to Daina.
Yeah, I think it's hugely important. And just to speak a little bit towards the privacy aspect of it, from our perspective with Bold Metrics, we produce very accurate avatars, 3D avatars that are true to the detailed dimensions and measurements of a customer. And so then you start to think about like the personal nature of an avatar, because we are like within millimeters accuracy of what your true body measurements would be, because we use these avatars within technical design, also within sizing guide and virtual fitting systems for end consumers when they're on the product display page, for example. And so, obviously brands care about their customers' data. People care about their personal information more than ever before. And when you start to layer onto that a super detailed avatar that represents their body very closely, then you start to have to really be concerned around the privacy of that. Our approach is to not collect any PII, personal identifiable information associated with that avatar. So it's never linked to the actual person's identity. And also, brands have an obligation to protect this data as well. So the data that we produce, we make available to our brands so they can then, build this 3D asset library of 3D avatars and measurement information of their consumers so that they can use that within their design cycles. But of course, it all needs to be protected privacy-wise, not be linked to an individual's information in order to take this into account, that people really care more than ever before about their privacy and their personal information. And there's a touch of individuality and personal nature about highly accurate avatars that we think about. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So yeah, again, just sort of adding to the layers and the complexity of avatar ownership. So let's talk a little bit about ownership and the positives and negatives of that, right? I'll start, if you don't mind, Tracy. I want to direct this one to you. What are the pros and cons of owning your own avatars, and how does a brand manage the technology and maintenance of their avatars?
Yeah, this is a really interesting topic. So I guess I can only speak to the ownership model that we use at Alvanon, and maybe other panelists can speak to different models if they use different models. So in our business model, Alvanon technically owns the avatar, and what we provide to our client or the brand is the one-time fee. They pay a one-time fee to develop their fit standard or their fit tool that then becomes an avatar. And then from there, they get perpetual exclusive license with no royalty fee. So once they develop their body, it's their body, and they can use it, without a royalty fee after that. So the pro is of owning your own avatar is you own it, right? And you can do whatever you want to do with it. I think the con that sometimes people don't think about is you own it. And it's kind of akin to driving a brand new car off the lot, right? You own that car and it immediately starts to depreciate. So as we know in this business, as technology changes, every 6 to 9 months or sometimes every 3 months, software providers are providing new and innovative technology within their system. Well, that avatar is static with the technology that it was built with, as it kind of came off the line, and you now own it with that technology. So conversely, with a perpetual license, as we move forward, the client moves forward as well. So as we update, for instance, meshes or features, your perpetual licensed avatar gets those updates automatically, and you don't have to worry about managing all of that. It happens as new things come along. We make sure that your avatar is up to date, and you don't get charged every time. So
awesome. That was a component of sort of the glory of the body platform that I hadn't really thought about before, was that having it continually updated. In my mind, it almost seems like, buying a house or renting, there's certain things you get with that rent, it's kept up to date. You don't have to have a plumber on speed dial or, in this case, a 3D artist that can help you update those bodies. That's amazing. I hadn't thought about that. And I'm really glad you shared that with us. Thank you.
Sure.
So Daina, on this topic of plus and minuses of owning your own avatars, what do you have to add to that one?
Yeah, I'd love to speak to this one as well. So, because first I'll describe the avatar ownership that we provide. So essentially, we have tools that offer a fit guiding system. So, whether it's a virtual dressing room, we have a smart size chart tool that helps guide the customer on what best size to purchase. And then we track purchase and returns data, so it continuously learns over time. But what happens behind the scenes is anytime someone interacts with our tool, we produce this AI body scan of them that produces all of their detailed body measurements that can then be turned into object files and essentially 3D avatars that we then give full access to our clients to use. So the brands that we work with to have access to this data. So technically anyone that goes to the tool, the brand then can have ownership of that data that they can then leverage and use mostly within technical design, some inventory management as well. So the pros there, everything's anonymized, no PII is connected to that to protect privacy, which I spoke to about earlier. But then brands have access to essentially like a feedback loop system for who their customers are from a body shape and size perspective, and tying that with purchases and what is kept and what is returned. And so we do a lot of return analytics and purchase analytics to tie to help brands understand, what is the actual true body measurements of the average person, the average 3D avatar that we can generate as well that fits into a size medium, and compare that set of body measurements with the fit model that was decided upon using to create the size medium sizing specifications. And so we can do a lot of those comparative analytics. So that's speaking to the pros of that. We manage in terms of like the statistical analysis of, what is your average avatar that they should look at for that size medium in that given example, so that we make it easy for brands to be able to parse through, because sometimes it can be like millions of purchases and millions of individual people. So it's not typical that you would look at an individual person, but more like a statistical representation of the average body, essentially the average 3D avatar that would purchase and keep an item, or perhaps looking at the segment that returns that same style, and what is the difference between those two body measurements.
Awesome. Just taking a step back, sort of as you guys are speaking to some of these points, it's all been great so far. We're still in the beginning, but it's interesting because it again reinforces what Ty set us up with in sort of thinking about this in terms of layers, because you have the brand side working with their physical dress forms in their working space or at their factories, but then also being able to have that asset in 3D. In that workflow of working within that technical design space, or you just at the brand level, is interesting because you have customers or a certain brand that has a certain market, but people are passing through that market continually. So I can understand how the body from like an Alvanon perspective would need to sort of be what that consumer is who's coming in and out of that brand or that market or whoever they've decided that their niche is. But at the same time, it is also helpful to understand how that how individual customers are sort of changing as they get older and as they move between brands. It's all sort of interesting. I'm like sort of teaming with ideas now. It's like, oh, this is a whole dissertation thing, Christian. Calm down. You're excited about enough things. So awesome. Thank you so much. So going from this idea of the plus and minuses of owning your own avatar, one of the components we talked about scanning, but there's also the authorship component, right? Ty mentioned earlier with the digitals and sort of creating assets. So Gina, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to bring you in. Are there any ownership and or authorship issues related to avatars?
There are definitely issues there. And when I think about these ownership issues, I like to think about who are the stakeholders in this virtual game. And the way I see it, and I think Ty alluded to at least two of these stakeholders, they're users of the virtual assets. There are the platforms that are providing the virtual assets. And then you have brands that, I guess in simple terms, they're exploiting the personal asset, the virtual assets and things like advertising and campaigns and all of that. And what's interesting as a lawyer is there are some very esoteric and yet to be determined legal tensions at all of those areas of virtual stakeholders. For example, in the real world, if typically, unless there's a contract or some other exception that applies, if you create it, you own it. But when you move to a virtual world, and for example, you have users of virtual assets that are providing, creative direction, but then you have the platforms that are implementing that virtual direction, creating the avatar and things of that sort. Well, there's definitely some tension there around joint ownership. And so, folks who are operating in this space have to be very careful, because even if, by way of example, you have terms of use and terms of service, and you clearly say to the users of your platform, look, you own this, or we own components of it, even in that scenario, there can be legal issues around that sort of ownership if something goes wrong. For example, if I'm a provider of virtual assets and I say, okay, you're going to own your avatar, well, then what happens if the platform that I'm providing for that avatar is disengaged or the business closes? Well, then what? So I own this asset, but I can't use it or exploit it. And so if a company's terms of use say you own it and you have all these rights, well, then that company could get themselves in a pretty bad pickle with respect to things like fraud claims and false advertising claims and things of that sort if the business is defunct. So it's super interesting. And to be frank with you, the courts haven't sorted out all of these issues that are coming up in a legal context. I mean, we may think that it's straightforward, but it's really not. And as a lawyer, I find myself scratching my head both around ownership issues and data privacy, like how would a court really resolve this issue?
Awesome. That's incredible food for thought. And I want to sort of move along, but it would be great too at the end if you, Gina, specifically, if you could sort of give people like me and some of our listeners a few quick tips to maybe, like, if you have a question about this or you're considering this, sort of think about it from this perspective. But I'll save that for you later because I'm interested to know too. So even if we don't have time to get to it, I'll be on your phone.
Sure, no problem.
Oh, Ty, I want to come to you. Thanks, Gina.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on a couple of things Gina said. Like what was interesting, and that was kind of what I was alluding to at the beginning from our perspective, is this avatar I'm wearing is built up from a series of shapes. And as a user, I made a series of choices. So is Tafi the creator of the avatar because we provided you those tools, or is the user the creator, right? Because the user decided what they wanted to look like. And then when you get into UGC user generated content, for those not in the video game world, when people start submitting that content, it's still built on our geometry and within our rules, but someone else spent the time to create it. And I thought two of the points Gina made that were really interesting is it's like, that starts to become, super nebulous on like, okay, who actually created that avatar? Because, you couldn't create it without the tools we provided you, but we didn't take the time to tell you what, your avatar should look like. And that's where that user layer of ownership becomes super interesting because, it's completely different.
Yeah, Ty, I'm so glad you said that, because that really, as I see it, is where most of the tension is. And I will tell you that based on the law that I'm aware of, it's a joint ownership issue, to be frank with you. So there's a joint ownership there. And unless you have contractual constructs around that joint ownership that that clearly demarcate what is the platform's rights with respect to that joint ownership, what are the user's rights, and you have to be very careful and very articulate around that. And I would not, engaging competent counsel on those issues is really important, because again, as in the example I used before, you can end up in court over issues around, fraud and false advertising and infringement and all of those things.
Yeah, and I wanted to, you mentioned another point in your previous chat, and I just wanted to quickly touch on it because it was not a con a lot of people had talked about yet, is, I come from the video game space originally, and then I made avatars on the Xbox platform before joining Tafi. And, one of the challenges on the Xbox 360, there was avatars, millions of users, and then that console ceased to exist and you moved to the Xbox One. Well, now those avatars weren't forward compatible. So people invested real money, real effort, real energy into these avatars that just ceased to exist. And so one of the cons of perceived digital ownership is most of what everyone does digitally now is in the cloud. It's all internet based, right? And so at some point, and you see this with mobile games all the time, where people have spent years investing in it, dollars investing in it, and then they announce that, hey, at the end of the year, we're turning off our servers and the game's gone. And so even if you had ownership per what, Gina outlined in that EULA, it really doesn't matter because there's now no output for your content. And that, not to plug us, but that's something we're trying to deal with our SDK, is to create other outputs. So you have a persistent avatar, because you really can't, from a user perspective, have ownership until that avatar is persistent outside of an ecosystem. Because if it's limited to an ecosystem, even an ecosystem like Roblox, which is a massive and making tons of money, eventually will be a product people don't use anymore. And so all that energy, all that investment is locked on that platform. And I think that's where that con of ownership really comes in, because you could come to a platform like that and they could say, okay, we'll sell you an avatar, and you're a celebrity, so you got to pay a little bit more, but you give us like 30 grand and this avatar is yours forever. Forever is really just until that platform ceases to exist. So I just wanted to touch on that real quick.
Yeah, that's definitely important, because I can't emphasize enough, and lawyers typically are the bearers of bad news, and I am no exception. You could really, as a platform, if you pull the plug on your platform and you have users that you say own their avatars, you could be in a really bad situation and find yourself in court.
Awesome. That's very engaging and very insightful. I was sort of just thinking about this, like if I have my digital avatar and then one day it disappears, that would be upsetting. I thought about it in terms of my fabric. Like, you mean my fabric will just disappear one day? Oh, like, ooh, I don't even want to think about it. But also thank you, Gina, for giving me some new phrasing, because now when I need to reach out to a lawyer, I will let people know I'm going to engage competent counsel because I'm not competent in this area. So thank you so much. Ty, just for our audience members who maybe aren't familiar with all the acronyms, SDK, you've thrown it out a few times.
Oh,
what
sorry.
exactly is it?
Software developer kit. So it's a set of tools that developers who make games or applications can absorb. And the idea is it shortcuts a chunk of effort, time, and money. So for us, our software developer kit is designed to allow somebody to bring avatars fully editable to that they could show to their customer, or they could keep internal, but their users could edit their avatars. Gives you content, gives you monetization backend, all that stuff. So it just shortcuts that development, but it also kind of democratizes that layer of development, because lower budget products generally skip this creation process because it's just really expensive and hard to do. And so our goal is to, again, allow more people to offer this level of expression as we get closer and closer to the fabled metaverse. So yeah, software developer kit. Apologize.
No problem. I just wanted to sort of make sure we're keeping our folks in the loop here. Thank you so much, guys. That was just on that whole topic in general, like that we've gone through in the beginning, and tying all of this to different platforms that reaches back to the conversation of the last panel about interoperability, and why that's so important to have assets that aren't just sort of tied to one panel. In my own mind, is just sort of what I'm thinking about. I love moderating these panels because I get to learn from you guys, but then sometimes I have to remember, no, Sally, Jesse, Raphael, you have to be the host, not the student. So thank you so much, guys. So in talking about these sort of areas of ownership and also being able to protect it, I want to jump in and bring Tracy back in to talk about encryption. So when it comes to these digital bodies, why is encryption important?
Yeah, encryption is really important. So the first thing is when we think about protection, right? So protection of the asset for the brand in our case. So we all want or think we want interoperability, and it sounds great. But from our perspective, we had to be really careful when we're talking about a brand's body standard that we help them create. But at the end of the day, it's really the ethos of who that brand is and who their target customer is. And most brands do not want that body shared out there in the universe without their consent or knowledge. So this includes both how it might be shared across a vendor community, and also as they're engaging with other third parties, and you know how their avatar might be used or shared with or without their permission. So I think encryption can really be a positive thing, because it protects the brand's avatar from being copied and disseminated in places where they may not be aware of or they might not be okay with. So within the Alvanon body platform, you touched on it earlier, Christian, only vendors approved by the brand have access to that brand's avatar. So the brand has to give permission and is aware of who is using and who has access to their avatar within the platform. And I think that's helpful and you know, can kind of put fears to rest a little bit for a lot of the brands that work with us. One other thing on encryption, we understand that it's kind of the wild, wild west out there right now, and people are pushing the limits of what they want to do with avatars, which is exciting and amazing. So this is a pretty constant challenge for us as providers to, you know, how do you navigate within this space? So hot off the press, I just talked to Jason the other night, and he was telling me that we're working on developing a method where the brand can utilize fully encrypted assets within their organization. So to do with whatever they want to do within their organization and not have to deal with the stuff that comes along with encryption. So we think that's will get us around some of the, you know, the hot points of encryption and ownership. And at the end of the day, it's kind of a win-win for brands. They can protect their avatar from being improperly used. And we also have some protection of the technology that we use to build those avatars, because honestly, people try to knock us off every day. So being protected on both sides, the brand side and the Alvanon side, is kind of our goal.
Awesome. I love the sort of just touching on those components of protection. And I also love sort of in what you said, that you also tie that to transparency. It's important not only to be able to see or to know that your data is protected or your avatars are protected, but also to have that pipeline transparency with your partners to know when and how they're using it as well. That's amazing. So I'm going to go to Gina and then to Ty.
Yeah, so I have one point / question around what Tracy just shared with respect to protecting avatars and encryption and what have you. And I just want to throw out as a point of thought that NFTs are a big deal right now. And I think that putting like standard encryption aside, that NFTs are also a way to control who has access to your avatar, in what context, to provide transparency around the avatar and how it's being used and what have you. So I just wanted to throw that out there as food for thought.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Thanks, Gina. Ty?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly kind of where I was going with this, is I think, when you start looking at blockchain and NFTs, see, because like what Tracy was touching on, it makes sense. And like, when I saw this question originally, why is encryption important? My brain instantly was like, it's not, because it doesn't work. So like at any point, like anybody who's in 3D knows that the minute you render something, the point cloud exists and I can take it. Like, so anywhere you can render 3D, you can pull that object out of the space. Like it doesn't matter how it's encrypted. Like it's the same problem that other like Sketchfab or Marmoset or whatever. Once I can render the object, I can pull that object out. Now it doesn't have all the bells and whistles. It's a flat version of the object, but that creates a challenge. And it's similar to what NFTs are seeing, where people are like, well, I can just right click save as, and it's like, sure. But what the NFT provides is ledger-based ownership. So even if someone's misappropriating your content, whether they hacked the system, pulled it out of a render or whatever, you have the NFT now to back up that protection. And I imagine Alvanon has contracts and all that great IP stuff to do the same thing. The nice thing about the ledger is it's just transparent and it's a new way to do this. And I think everybody's looking at this as a cool opportunity. But that's because like traditional encryption only works to a point. Like, of course, it stops like 80% of the world, right? Most people aren't going to take the effort to write an algorithm to pull your content, but it still is a risk. And so it ends up being this real challenge when you talk about encryption as this lock and key, because at the end of the day, it doesn't work. Like it's that really good middle ground. And so that's where NFTs get exciting for businesses like ours. Like not necessarily what you're seeing from an art perspective, although our company does that because it's digital content, but from an actual back-end ledger and IP management, like almost like digital certificates of authenticity, it becomes more powerful than just traditional encryption and licensing. So
awesome. Those are very, very heavy things to think about, right? But that's also, it's sort of like a double-edged sword with most things. Like this is the apparel industry. I think we're all accustomed to challenges. But what's also sort of interesting about this conversation is you sort of talk about, what encryption is now and how it protects, like maybe 80%, just making that number up, right? But at the same time, this is all evolving so quickly that, what is valid today, tomorrow will be something else. And it's nice to know that there are platforms trying to keep up with that and changing as you go. I think that's sort of like the positive negative to, well, this platform may not exist tomorrow, but at the same time that gives us an opportunity to stay ahead of the game and reinvent and come up with new things and make sure we are contacting competent counsel, and also just keeping this synergy going. I love it. It's tough stuff, but I think That's exactly what the apparel industry is made of, right?
Well,
We've been through these things before. We get knocked off and we figure out how to protect ourselves moving forward and continue making great product for our customers.
and
Can you tell I'm a fan of this industry? Sorry. Go ahead, Ty.
Yeah, no, I was going to say one thought, like, and I think that's what you just talked about was what Tracy was touching on earlier with the, the perpetual license concept. It's like, look, they update as it goes because this changes so fast. But I also think, I'm definitely outside the apparel industry. I understand the rest of you are all fashion focused. So you have a better insight here than I do. But for me, it's interesting because a lot of like, even what I've seen Alvanon do is taking what is like a traditional workflow and digitizing it, but it's rooted in this traditional workflow. And when you talked about the concerns of the brands, Tracy, and it's like, from my perspective, and I could be wrong. It's like, that's all based on the fact that fashion for so long has had to deal with knockoffs and ripoffs and people like building, like trying to trade on each other's clout and each other's, intellectual property. And in the digital space, that becomes like, someone said the Wild West. It becomes even worse because it's even harder to track. And so it ends up, and even with some of the licensed partners we talk to, because we work with, brands for our content, it's that kind of stuff where people have trouble making that leap to like, well, no, this is the digital space now. You don't have to worry about that. Like people are going to bootleg your stuff, but don't worry, like the real stuff will monetize better. And it's just that mindset shift, because I feel like so much of that is trying to like what Alvanon and others are doing is trying to bridge that gap from like, I get it. This is how you do things and this is how you used to do things, but like you have this opportunity to do so much more. And I think that's super interesting.
Can I follow on with what Ty just said? So part of what's going on in the fashion industry, a large part, I'll say, is and I don't mean this disrespectfully, it's a dinosaur mentality, that there's a reluctance and a fear around embracing technology. I think the pandemic has pushed fashion companies and brands and designers more towards technology and what have you. And I agree with Ty completely. There are some really fabulous potentially opportunities for designers and fashion brands to include luxury brands in the NFT space, for example. You can solve the authenticity problem there. You can solve some of the sustainability issues with respect to digital assets, because if you're using those assets for promotions and sample making and what have you. And then on the, money talks. So in the gaming community, skins are a big deal. And so imagine a luxury brand having NFTs in the gaming community. I mean, the sky's the limit on how much money they can make.
Awesome. So Gina, first of all, Ty, you are a part of the apparel establishment now, sir. So
thank you. I appreciate that.
Greet us with open arms. You're one of us now. Let's keep these conversations going and continue building. Also, to Gina's point, it's sort of one of those things that sort of like gets a crick in my neck. There are like fashion is archaic in a lot of ways, but there are also so many ways, like just to the discussion that we're having now, where technology isn't there yet. Cloth, for example, is something we've invented thousands of years ago, and we're still working to really capture the complexities of cloth because we've been innovating on it the whole time. And I mean, in a sort of more biological way, we've been innovating on our bodies the whole time. As we become more globalized, bodies look different. So this is all changing, and like there are a lot of things that are archaic, but those are also just some of the points that we sort of love to, that handmade craftsmanship and things that people start to touch back on. But yeah, very, very broad is the landscape of things where we can bring all of this together. So I'm excited to have you all here to talk about that. So I want to take a step back. And I think this is something that just in general, any one of you can chime in on. And if one of the other panelists missed something, please do chime in. I don't know who wants to take this one first, but just to give our I keep saying listeners like I'm on NPR. I've been listening to too much talk radio. our viewers, what are some of the different types of ownership out there today when it comes to bodies, avatars? Do any of you have any types of ownership just to throw out there? Is there anything that we haven't mentioned? Yes, no, maybe. I guess I will take that as we've already mentioned everything.
No, I mean, like, I'm happy. I've talked a lot, so I was trying not to bogart the conversation. But no, I mean, like, I think the ownerships, we've talked about is like, how Alvanon approaches it with, the brands have the license to that specific avatar, or, Bold Metrics talked about how, they remove privacy information when they pass their avatars on, but that avatar, but like, I think the challenge is the types of ownership are like, there's the intellectual property side where it's like, look, we built these avatar systems. We built like literally stuff as simple as like how your topology works, like the way. And so I don't get down that problem again. Topology is essentially the grid that makes 3D. So the 3D character I'm wearing is made up of a few thousand, I can give you the exact number, triangles, right? Like just like geometry in math class. And those triangles, how you lay them out changes how cloth, like if you made it cloth in Browseware or Clo or Marvelous Designer, those triangles change how that lays out, or those triangle positions change how dynamic that character can be. So those decisions, how Alvanon does it belongs to them. Those decisions, how Bold Metrics does it belongs to them. How we do it belongs to us. And we literally have ours patented because of how core it is to our business. So there's that level of ownership, but then you get to that next layer where it's like, okay. And so, and Cameron with the digitals is a great example. He's taken that platform and created characters. So he's now used that triangle layout, and he's created characters that he owns because he added his own artistic layering on top. And our user agreement allows him to, like, it facilitates that ownership. So now he can sell that character's likeness to brands like Lexus, Samsung, whatever. And so now he owns that layer. And then there's a layer deeper that goes to those users, which Gina touched on, where it's like, okay, now the user has some creative like ownership of what they built, but there's no way to like officiate that. And so that's where NFTs become super interesting, because now you could have a user purchase the metadata, and metadata is all the pieces that make this avatar. So the avatar I'm wearing is built on a recipe. We know to call this hat in black, this skin, this beard in red, like, right? Like all those details live in what's called metadata. And it could be anything from a JSON file to something more detailed. Well, that can be packed in to the blockchain. So now you could tell your user, okay, you can purchase this recipe, but all they own is the details that make the avatar. The avatar itself only generates if the system knows how to read that metadata. So that system can still go away. And you could argue that the user still owns their avatar because they own the details, but that avatar can't now manifest. So those are, like, from my perspective, the different layers of ownership. But even something as simple as, we sell Champion gear. So we could sell you a Champion hat, but at any point Champion could say, oh no, we don't want to do that hat anymore. And we would pull it from our system. But the end user who bought the hat still has it in their account and can still use it, but new users can't have it. And so, but that's how the ownership kind of train works. And so I don't know if we missed any, and I put that to the rest of the group, but I think that's where the nuance becomes super interesting, because there are those deep layers of that ownership.
Yeah, and just to dovetail up what you were mentioning, Ty, with these layers of IP and layers of ownership, I like how you frame that, actually. And when we think about Bold Metrics, the IP part of the avatar ownership, really, for us, the IP is the technology, the underlying technology behind producing highly accurate, detailed, we do like over 50 body measurements that we produce, detailed measurements that then go into generating a highly accurate avatar from a body measurement and shape perspective. And that IP is something that we closely protect, but then the resulting avatar that we produce and, tie that avatar data in with purchases and returns and consumer behavior on what they're keeping and liking the fit for. All of that kind of analytics data we provide to our clients, which are the brand and the retailer, and give them ownership of that body measurement data or the 3D avatar data so that they can make use of that within their design cycles. And for us, we see that as an important aspect of our product offering, because having a way for brands to have the cyclical understanding of their fit and sizing. There's a lot of issues right now that are becoming more apparent to consumers around size inclusivity. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that within the technical design cycles, there's just a lack of data related to your actual customers, the demographic of your customers from a body shape and size perspective, and how can you properly ensure that you're designing for your customers. And so providing that feedback loop through accessing sort of democratization of the access of avatar information and body measurement information, tying that to purchase and returns is that sort of additional layer of ownership. So they can have access to that and own that. Whereas our bottom layer being that IP that goes behind generating accurate avatars is something that is our IP and ownership. So I like framing it that way from that perspective, Ty, like this layers of ownership. And we're actually very excited about the future of NFTs as it relates to the concept of your sort of a way, your digital self that's authenticated on blockchain as you. So, I could see a lot of applications for this in the future where you can have your digital authenticated self that's a detailed representation of your body that could be used for a lot of different applications, even outside of apparel. And I think that'll be really exciting to see how this evolves in the future.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Daina. And Gina, I'm coming to you, but because we've touched on this area of IP, which again, this is where we need our competent counsel. So one of the questions that we had is, are avatars appropriate subject matter for intellectual property protection? And it sounds, based on Ty and Daina, that yes, maybe they are. So could you sort of take whatever additions you had and then, just cap off this IP conversation for us?
Yeah, sure. So some of this will be a recap of what Daina and Ty have shared with us, and other parts of it will not. So when you're talking about intellectual property and frankly other ownership type areas of the law that can be associated with avatars, you're typically talking about trademarks, copyrights, and then and patents. And then on the non-IP-ish types of ownership issues, you're talking about rights of publicity, you're talking about issues around false light and defamation. And I'll just throw out a few quick examples. So let's say I'm on a platform and I'm customizing my avatar, and I want to wear the Gucci label on my t-shirt. Well, as a user, I may incur some liability around doing that if I'm commercializing my avatar, because the trademark laws require a commercial use component. But if, on the other hand, I'm using my avatar for non-commercial purposes, I may not get sideways with Gucci in that respect. The same would be true with respect to rights of publicity. So let's say you're using a celebrity's name and likeness in an avatar as a user. Well, if you're not commercializing that avatar, making money off of it, you might be okay. But if you're commercializing it, you wouldn't. And then probably one of the more subtle risks around doing something like that would be if you're not commercializing the avatar and you're using the name and likeness of someone who's famous, but you use the avatar in a way that sheds a bad light on that individual, well, then you could be in real trouble, because then you're facing like defamation lawsuits and things of that sort. So there are, like, on top of the layers that we've talked about here today, there are sort of like sub layers even that you have to think about. And it's a lot to wrap your head around, to be honest, even for a lawyer.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot. It's sort of funny. So at some point in the future, when life is life again and we are all able to be in the same place, I feel like we should all get together and have a lasagna dinner, because we've talked so much about layers and everything that goes in between the layers. So we're working down toward the bottom of our session here. This has been great. For all of our viewers out there, I just want you to know there have been some questions in the chat that are very sort of brand specific. Because we're trying to drive discussion here, we would all appreciate it if you could direct those questions specifically to the brands here, or to Gina if you have specific those kinds of questions, because I think they would be better answered sort of person to person. But to wrap up, guys, and this is a question to all of you, we're all here because this is important to us, in an important area in general. So looking toward the future, what are you guys excited about, and where are some of the big areas of opportunity? We are down at the bottom of the time, so make it quick, but what makes you excited about this, and what do we have to look forward to? Whoever wants to go first. Tracy?
Yeah, I'm most excited about personalization. Like, I can't wait until I can shop with my own avatar, and I hope I'm going to be able to accept what it actually looks like. That is my goal. That the body positivity movement for all of us will allow us to accept ourselves as we really are. Or maybe I have the ability to change it if I don't like it. But I have said this for years and years and years, when it's still kind of a crazy idea, but it's becoming less of a crazy idea. And I think it will really happen. So I'm excited about that.
Awesome. Me too. Yeah, that'll be a great day, and I can try it on online. Daina, sorry.
Dana, it's a common mistake. Where does it go?
Yeah, tricked you out with that guy. I was like, no, I've been calling her Daina the whole time.
Okay, so to echo what Tracy just mentioned, so I'm just really excited about more digital adoption happening within the apparel industry, and we're seeing this accelerated, actually, at least from our perspective, from the pandemic, with more and more brands and retailers adopting better practices digitally for better consumer experiences on e-com. I don't see a future really where we're going to have the e-commerce model with this ideal body type be the visual cue for us to shop online, and puzzling over size charts and like, what is my hip circumference? Nobody knows. So having a better approach, where it's actually a representation of yourself. So having a 3D virtual dressing room with an avatar that is more close to you, or even like a step in between that, which we're working on, which is updating the e-commerce model with an actual model that's more representative of your customer that wears that size small through the data that we generate. So I'm really looking forward to a future like that, a future perhaps even with integrating NFTs into the space, where you can have your digital authentic 3D avatar of yourself that you've pre-approved for fitting. And so I think there's just going to be a lot of exciting things in the future down the line from a digital perspective that I'm very excited to be a part of.
Awesome. All right, Ty, Gina, I know you guys are excited about something.
Yeah, Gina, you want to go first? I can wait.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a former computer software engineer, so I'm a bit of a gearhead. I love technology, and I'm a self-professed fashion technology evangelist. So what I'm super excited about is, what does the future hold for the fashion industry in the areas of 3D assets and bioengineered fabrics and robotics, and there's just, the sky is the limit so far as I can tell, and I'm just really excited to see what unfolds.
Awesome.
And I'll keep it super short. For me, it's because everyone kind of touched on it, is that concept of digital twinning is as people's digital lives become more and more prevalent, and that line is going to continue to blur. I'm just really excited to see how avatars play a part in that. And I think the other element is the social aspect. I think people miss, you want to go try on clothes with a friend or whatever. And I think as we get further and further into that, like really, metaverse, omniverse, whatever you want, I think that's going to be super interesting.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. I'm sort of rifling through my things here because I wanted to find something. Oh, well, it's not here. I was looking for my Crest white strips because Ty's avatar has me really feeling like I need to whiten. So thank you all so much. This was such a fun and interesting panel. I've learned so much. I feel now more like I don't just have to rely on my cousin Vinny and Legally Blonde to sort of understand some of these aspects. So thank you guys. Yeah, that was wonderful. I enjoyed it, certainly. I hope the audience did. Thank you
Can
to
I
all the
give a
panelists.
plug? Can I give a plug to my cousin Vinny? That's actually a great thing for young lawyers to watch if you want to figure out how to do a well-executed cross-examination. Just saying.
Awesome. Awesome. I love it. I love it. It is one of my, it's on the rack back there. So it's a favorite. Thank you.
You know
guys.
what? I didn't think that we'd be plugging my cousin Vinny today, but that's just the beauty of these spotlights, is that there's always something weird and wonderful that comes out of it. So yeah, Gina, thank you for that. Dana, thanks for your help as always. Tracy, again, really, really well done on the panel. And Ty, excellent contribution on top of your avatar as well. I know we've all really enjoyed that. And lastly, but not leastly, I think a big shout out to you, Christian, for all of your excellent work today. Thanks so much from everyone here. Yeah, exactly. Definite deserving a round of applause. So cheers, buddy. And always a pleasure to join you on one of these.
Thank you guys so much, PI. You know, I love you guys. You're sort of become an extension of my, you know, family here. Though I haven't seen you guys in forever because you're across the pond and we're observing, you know, the pandemic. But thank you all for allowing me to live my Sally Jesse Raphael fantasy and be a talk show host. Next time I'm telling you I'm going to have red glasses and then I'll be. But thank you guys so much. These conversations are so important. If you are not, I'm going to plug PI. If you're not a member of the, if you're not on the PI members platform, please do join it, because I don't know anywhere else where this kind of content that's open and honest and not just, you know, based on like, here's our product, buy it, but actually let's talk about the issues and that are going to make, and the things that are going to make our industry better. I love this industry. I'm happy to have all of you as a part of my group of friends now. We will be in contact and having that lasagna dinner at some point. So